Hello everyone and welcome to the Hidden Lives of Writers. My name's Fiona Snyckers and I'm joined by Gail Schimmel.
Hello everyone.
Gail, I'm almost scared to ask, are you still on a writing hiatus or have you resumed?
So I've been doing a lot of work this week on the Katie Gail writing. So I feel a little bit like I am writing again, and that my brain is taken up a little bit with plotting. And that really is what's been interesting about this week, because we are in the stage of a book where we're coming to the end. We now know exactly who committed the murder in the current book and how it's all going to come to an end. And we're having to go back and remove the things we put in that we thought would lead somewhere and didn't. And it's quite interesting seeing how in a murder mystery, if you're not a very careful chapter by chapter plotter and you do a little bit of pantsing in it, you put in a whole lot of leads that go nowhere, and you go back and you're like, what on earth were we trying to imply with this paragraph? We must have had some idea, but we don't know what. So it's been quite fun and interesting, and seeing how where our brains started and where our brains are ending the change. What about you, Fiona? How's your writing week been? Still getting up at the crack of dawn, are we?
I am. I'm keeping that going. I feel slightly exhausted because I've been cutting my sleep short in order to get up early and write, but it always feels worth it afterwards. I think I talked last week about how I was starting to familiarize myself with the Final Draft software for writing a screenplay. And I am slowly getting the hang of it. I'm realizing that it allows you to sort of enter the name of a person who's going to be saying the dialogue, then the dialogue. It lets you give some direction about the shots you want to use, some comments about what the actor might do, some of the action that's taking place. So I'm becoming more familiar with the idiom there, which is freeing me up to think about how exactly I would like this movie to look. And I was busy doing something that I thought was really cheating. I had a script open in front of me, and I was looking at how that filmmaker created that script and thinking, now what can I use in creating my script? And we had a sort of chemistry meeting with a possible director over Zoom.
A chemistry meeting. We really are talking the jargon.
So we just sort of seeing, whether there is a good vibe between us. And I have to say, hopefully that there was. So fingers crossed. But she was saying, oh, I hope you've got some scripts open in front of you to see how they do it. And I was like, oh, I thought that was cheating. You mean I'm allowed to do that? And she gave some recommendations of scripts that she uses for teaching, because she does lecture in film. And one of them was American Beauty, and also I think Good Will Hunting, and there were a couple of others. But to somebody who is sort of trying to learn screenwriting, whether it's for TV or feature film, it's not at all a bad idea to look at how someone else has done it. And I used to do that with novels. I taught myself plotting by taking a favorite novel and breaking it down into its elements and seeing what that writer did and asking myself, can I do the same thing?
Fiona, that's so interesting, because that leads to what I'm consuming at the moment, and how I'm consuming it maybe more. So I found myself yesterday at the hairdresser, where there is normally good Wi-Fi, and I work very well, and the Wi-Fi was down. I didn't have a book with me. I've actually just finished the book that I was reading. So I sat for a bit and I looked around, and then I thought, no, I want to read. I've got to do something with my time. And I went back to our favorites, Greer Hendricks and Sarah Pekkanen, and I am reading their book, You Are Not Alone. And I'm interested, first of all, so many things there that interest me about my own behavior. Why do I see it as a slightly naughty thing I'm doing? I think maybe it's a bit because I was trying to save that type of read for holiday, and I'm cheating and reading it not on holiday and having that holiday read yummy feeling.
Yeah.
But secondly, what is it about their writing that is so compelling? And this new one is just as compelling as they always are. I think it's quite an old book for them. It's a new book for me. What is it they do that draws you in, that follows a formula that other writers use, but they do it so well that you don't feel manipulated by the formula at all. And so I'm reading it, one part of my brain, just yummy, yummy, delicious, I'm gobbling this up. But the other part, the writer in me, is trying to figure out what it is they do.
And have you come to any insights? Because I need to know this.
I haven't really, because the yummy, yummy gobble it up part is in ascendance at the moment. But afterwards, I'm hoping that I have a thing. I think part of it is the two writer change of point of view thing. But, one can do that as a single writer as well, change your point of view. But it's they use a lot of the typical cliffhanger, hint at something happening and you don't know what it is. And this one's got a big, this group of women are up to something bad, but you're not really sure at all what it is and how everyone else fits in. And you keep reading in a hungry way. And again, because I started reading at the hairdresser, I'm reading on my phone. And I am beginning to suspect that I read in a different way on my phone. Is it good? Is it bad? I don't know. Okay. Fiona, what are you reading and what are you reading it on?
Okay, well, for once I'm being quite highbrow in my reading habits. I'm reading Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver. I resisted it for months, but, eventually they wore me down and I'm reading it. And I was so surprised to discover that it's actually funny, that it is told in a humorous and amusing way. And there is this very likable first-person protagonist that you are rooting for. And he speaks in what I imagine is the idiom of rural Appalachia where it's set. And it's very entertaining. It's almost like the idiom of the Irish writers, where just the way they speak and the way they write is amusing. So that is really making the rather painful subject matter go down in an entertaining way. So it's also a masterclass in writing. It's a way of conveying some serious subject matter in a very rollicking, entertaining kind of fashion. I definitely recommend that.
It's the first time that I haven't immediately bought and read one of her books, and it is because I am so scared of what everyone says is the very serious subject matter. And in fact, people have said when I talk about I can't read serious at the moment, I can't be traumatized, and friends have said then don't read it.
Right.
So I'm interested. Once you've finished, you will give me an instruction on whether to read it or not.
I suspect it's going to be a yes from me. Our guest today really does not need a seriousness warning. He is a well-known humorist. He's very entertaining, and I can't wait to get into conversation with him. Our guest today is Ndumiso Ngcobo. He is the author of Some of My Best Friends Are White from 2007, Is It 'Cause I'm Black from 2008, Eat, Drink and Blame the Ancestors from 2014. He is a Sunday Times lifestyle columnist, a very popular commentator on social media. Ndumiso, thank you for your time and welcome.
It is my pleasure to be here. Well, thank you for having me.
Ndumiso, you told us that you actually listened to the podcast, so you're all ready for the first question we're going to ask you, which is, how has your writing week been?
I'm not used to describing what my writing week has been, purely because Gail and I, just before we started the podcast, we were talking about memories. I've got a horrible short-term memory. Ask me something that happened on the 17th of February, 1987, and I can tell you very clearly what it was like. So this week, the writing week actually comes at a very interesting time for me, because I'm writing so many things at the same time, which is true to my nature. And I hope it doesn't come out as strongly in the podcast, but that's a sign of how I think. I can only be interested in anything for sort of 20 seconds, and then I need to move on to the next thing. And so my writing has borne that out. Right now, it depends who asks me, for what reason and when, but it is somewhere between 80 and 90% of the way through my very first foray into fiction. So my manuscript.
Oh, wow, this is exciting
So
news.
if you had asked me, say in November, I would have said it was at 97% there, because I was feeling very good about it. It was done. But that's how my brain works. And so my writing week has been very typical, exactly how all my writing weeks have been, all over the place. A lot of impatience with myself as I struggle with a character. Writing creative nonfiction, I just thought in my head, it's just the most natural thing that, I think that I write creatively. I write very anecdotally. And I thought, writing a novel is going to be a breeze. No, it's not. So that's been my writing week.
How far along are you with that project?
Like I said, it depends, When I started telling you, 3-4 minutes ago, I said to you, between 80 and 90%. It might change by the time we finish this conversation, as we go. And that's possibly part of why it has taken me as long as it has, because it's not all I'm doing.
I think I'm going to have to come back and interrogate this a little bit more.
Yeah.
Well, I'm interested to know, do you have a publisher waiting for the book? Are you writing to deadline, or is this something that it's a passion project that you're writing off your own bat?
The only time I ever wrote to a deadline, I felt, and this was my second book, which was not in 2008, 2009. And I remember this very clearly because of the type of 2009 I had. The only time I ever wrote to deadlines, I did not enjoy it at all. I do not like it, which is very interesting for someone who has been writing a weekly column.
I was just wondering about that.
14 years. So that's 50 columns, times 14, come September, And so that tells you everything you need to know about my week and how, because I do not enjoy deadlines. I do not like what it does to me. I do not like what it does to people around me. When I know Wednesday is coming up, my Sunday Times column is coming up, which is why when you guys asked me, could you possibly do this on the Wednesday, because today is a Thursday, I said, hell no. Not no Wednesday. It was pre and post. I'm writing it, until I'm happy, with the manuscript. So yeah, no deadline whatsoever.
Okay. You have written on social media about how you made the jump from the corporate world into a more creative space, working as a radio presenter, working as a columnist, a writer. Was it a pull or a push, or was it both a push and a pull? What happened there?
And can I jump in there and read a quote from an article I found, which I loved, which says that I've lost it. Once upon a time, you used to be an intelligent, relevant man with a respectable, boring as crap job, which funded his extensive beer habit. One day he woke up and discovered that he had lost his mind, quit his well-paying job, penned a collection of hallucinations. And it goes on. I think that sounds like the origin story there.
Yeah, it is. The question, no one's ever asked me that question in that manner. But I would say it was neither. So, I do not remember a time that I wasn't reading and writing. And when I say that, I actually mean it literally, as in some of my very first memories. And I don't know whether I'm blessed or cursed. Speaking of memory, I remember things as far back as when I was 2, which my mom always says, but you would have been 2 when that was happening. And so those memories do not include a time when I wasn't reading anything or writing anything. And so I've always written. And so almost the first 35 years of my life, because I got published for the first time when I was 35, and I had written nothing. I've never studied writing. I've never studied journalism. I had never done anything that should have been prep for me to be writing anything. But that 35 years is 35 years of reading literally hundreds, if not thousands of books, and forever writing. And so am I writing because I'm going somewhere with it? Probably not. It's probably just a compulsion. I write because I write. That's what I do. That's who I am. It does not matter. I could decide tomorrow to never have anything published. I'm still a writer. That's what I do. So there isn't absolute clarity in my mind about whether something was luring me and saying to me, come, or was there a push that I felt, that the compulsion. I come from a family of a lot of writers, published writers that matter as well. So it just was always natural that I felt that I should be writing. I did not feel that there was like a huge dramatic jump from what I was doing before and now I'm writing, because I'd always in my mind been in that space.
And what were you doing before? What were the first 35 years spent on?
Oh, good Lord. The last thing I did for money before I wrote, I was an R&D manager for a fat and oil specialist company called Hudson and Knight, which used to be a subsidiary of Unilever, which is interestingly where I started with Unilever. And so I had joined Unilever about 6-7 years prior in the technical fields because I studied food science, microbiology and biochemistry. And so that's what I had been doing for the previous 7 years. And before that, I had done my second leg of studying, because the first time I studied at university, I failed so miserably. They actually kicked me out of university. And one of the things that I did along the way is life spewed me out as a high school mathematics and science teacher for about 4.5 and 5 years. So that's in a nutshell what I had been doing.
That is completely unexpected. Maths and science teacher, R&D manager. I'm stunned by this. I'm going to have to sit back and take a deep breath and reset my head. Fiona, you can have the mic.
Yeah.
How did you get your column? And if somebody were trying to pursue that career today, what would you say to a youngster who's looking up to you and wanting to emulate that career path?
One of the things I always say when young people, well, sometimes not so young people, say to me, I'm an aspiring columnist, or I'm an aspiring writer, or I'm aspiring. I always say, well, because part of what I do, part of what I write, my headspace is I am obsessed with just life's absurdities and just things that we take for granted. So, for instance, when someone says I'm an aspiring writer, I always say, well, try and imagine that you are approaching Usain Bolt and you're saying to Usain Bolt, I'm an aspiring sprinter. So how absurd, it's preposterous. I mean, you can't be an aspiring writer. You either are or you're not. Mm-hmm. And so, but your question is actually quite specific about the column. One of the things, I thought, because I was just so in love with my own thoughts, thinking that I'm just the most brilliant thing. I'm so unique. Do you know what I mean? That, I say in the introduction, this is what I write in the introduction to my first book. Some of my best friends are white. And I said, and I remember I used to fantasize about my ideal job would be for me to just sit in a room and just have people come through the room and just ask me my opinions about it. and I think, and in my head, I just thought a column is such a beautiful vehicle to do that, to get paid for people to just, read what you have to say, because your thoughts are so fascinating, right? And so that was that. But I would say to someone who said they wanted to do this, the obvious things is, if you haven't read 1,000 books, at least, you have no hope in hell of actually being a decent writer, right? So that's the one thing. And I'm assuming that this person would have done that work. But to be a columnist, the question that you're asking me is, how did I very carefully and very deliberately put myself out there through blogs as someone who could churn out piece after piece, whether it was rubbish, because a lot of it is, writing about my socks and my dogs and how my cats lick my feet or whatever the case may be. But that's what a column is, right? It's just your own thoughts in your own little space. Is to write and write often, illustrate that you can, because I did not have to go looking for a column in the Sunday Times. The Sunday Times came to me and said, would you like to write for us? Purely because I had been doing it for a couple of years. So for 2 years, from 2007 and 2009, when I started the column. Yeah.
So when you say there's no such thing as an aspiring writer, you would say that a person who is going to be a writer is writing already and they're aspiring to be successful.
Yeah.
So you can't come and say, I want to start writing. It's something you're either doing or you're not.
That conversation, if someone comes to me and says to me, well, how do I start writing? I cannot be helpful because I have never experienced it. Because I've just always been writing. So I'd be giving you BS, because I do not know. How do you, I would say, okay, read. If you've been reading, chances are, cause how I knew that I thought I could have something published is I'd just be writing an email, because I'd conducted a factory trial, margarine factory trial of all things. And I thought it had gone really well, but then I'd be writing this report. But my little captions that I was writing, everyone used to say, you use such flowery language to explain how you converted fats and oils into margarine. And everyone's like, like how everyone now on social media is like, you write so well, you really should consider writing. That was happening with me outside of social media, is everyone. And of course, when people were saying it, I knew it. And so I started writing these little pieces just for me, for my own titillation and so on, and sharing it with friends. And before I knew it, I started thinking, well, if I compiled these things, because I knew what was out there, and I said, some of my friends would say, well, this is better than a lot of the books we're reading, so why don't you just have this published? And that's how it happened. And so there wasn't a moment, there wasn't eureka, there wasn't an epiphany that I should happen. It was just a gradual thing. And I can only tell you how it happened with me, purely because, well, number one, I just don't like being prescriptive, but also because I do not have very clear ideas about how other people could do that. I'm just hoping that me just describing how I did it would be one way of doing it. Yeah.
I'm not sure if you're going to be able to answer this, but can you tell us what has to happen in one's brain that you must walk through life looking for the anecdote in the small life experiences? Does it take a particular, do you have to kind of adjust your head and go, head, remember to be looking out for the anecdote, to be looking for the story, or does it happen naturally for you?
Jeez, I just feel like I'm not being particularly useful. I do not know if I'm a good person to go by, because again, for me, it happens just naturally. Okay. My brain is just a sponge. When I walk into situations, because people are forever saying it, and how they say it sometimes is almost a case of, but you couldn't possibly have lived long enough for you to have witnessed so many things. And I'd say to someone, well, the thing about it is, maybe when you and I walk into the same space, you don't observe nearly as many little idiosyncrasies about people and little things. So, for instance, the young man who's busy helping us with the podcast here today, he came in here, and purely because of how my brain works, I'm very curious about him. I'm thinking, whoa, who's this guy? I could literally leave here, get into my car, and write a story about him. And our interaction has really been, non-existent. He just came in here, he did a sound check. And so your brain, I do not know how well anyone's brain could be trained or socialized into thinking in that particular way. For instance, I enjoy stupid things like sitting and writing at the airport. So I'm one of those people who get to the airport 2.5 hours before I need to actually be there. just so I can watch people. It's like, Fiona, where is she going? You know?
I am beginning to think that this is a common writer thing. Fiona, I want us to do some research into this. Writers love airports because there are stories in airports.
I love aeroplanes. I love being on an aeroplane where there's no possibility of checking my social media. And people are looking at me. They're seeing when my laptop's on my lap, they can see, am I actually typing or am I staring at my screen like a fool? And that feeling of, keep typing. I'm extraordinarily productive.
But so you use it as a productivity tool, whereas I use it as an idea generator. I think I'm very interested in the stories that play out in airports. And it sounds like you do too.
Yeah, no, I'm very fascinated about where people are going, where they're coming from, who they are, why they're speaking to this person and not
how
that
they
person.
How they greet
each other. You know, I mean, I have given birth to so many children in airports and I've similarly, you know, killed so many people. I mean, I've seen people, you know, go into that plane and only because they just want to go and die in Australia, you know, because that's how my brain works, you know. Yeah, but yeah.
So let me ask you another impossible question. If someone came to you and said, Ndumiso, how can I be funny? How do you be funny? What is it? The secret of humor? I know it's impossible to answer, but everyone who is a successful humorist has some interesting take on it. The essence of humor.
The essence of humor is that, you know, and I think, good Lord, you know, people have written so much about humor. And all I can say about humor is this. There are obviously techniques, you know, that someone could be taught, on how to be funny. You know, anyone can have, can go to a class and take a class about, the techniques. So for instance, stupid things like, your face, if you're going to be doing stand-up comedy. But if you're writing humor, it's about the words that you use. It's a very technical thing, where instead of saying, for instance, if I say, you know, he shouted, it's never as funny as when someone say he yelled. Yelling just seems to be funnier than saying someone shouted. So stupid little things like that. But when it comes to humor is, again, it just lends itself to observation. You know, it's about observation. It's about looking at people, but then looking at people, with empathy, empathetically. Which is why I always say about humor, I find it very difficult to make fun of someone that I genuinely dislike.
Right.
Because as a general rule, and this now speaks to the culture now, you know, wokeism and humor. And the thing about humor is it does not really matter how much you try and spin it. Humor is mean. Humor is mean. And it's, so even the humor that we all go, but that's like innocuous humor, or, you know, it's always about someone tripping and falling. Someone got hurt. And that's, humor is obviously our, it's our human, coping mechanism for things that, quite honestly, we either find uncomfortable, things happening that shouldn't be happening. That's what humor really is. And so the question about how does one become funny, is, and here's the thing. When I started writing, I didn't know that I was writing humor.
Did you know that you were funny?
I did not know that I was funny. I was just writing because, and it was just me really observing things, and I suppose putting them at such a basic level that your only reaction to it can only be to laugh at it, because it's either I'm stupid as the writer, but you've kind of figured out, no, this guy is actually not, you know, he's not being stupid, in which case then what he's doing is what I suppose people call satire and parody, is you're just taking what's already absurd and you're making it even more absurd. And so when I was writing, and then people would say, "Oh, but that was hilarious." And I'd say, "Well, that was." And said, "Okay, so how did I get to write that way?" And I just realized that part of it is my scientific brain going is I like to take things and just tear them into their most basic blocks. So the most fundamental. Once you take things and you're not speaking about them at a superficial level, and you actually look at what it actually means, what people did, I think people will find that fun.
So basically, humour is breaking the margarine down into its fats and oils.
Into its fats and oils. And that's funny. Yeah.
Ndumiso, you touched on wokeism, and I want to know about this. Writing humour for so many years, the world has changed a lot, and we are a lot more careful, and we're all trying very hard to be woke, but not in an irritating way. How are you navigating this?
The short answer to that question is with great difficulty. It's actually quite fascinating that we are where we are, because long before, anyone on social media started using the words woke and wokeism, and I was one of those people, who back in the days, sometimes I read things I wrote, say, I don't know, like 13, 14 years ago, and I would say things like, as I wrote it, I'd be very aware that what I've said here now is a bit risque, is a bit, and then I'd have to qualify it with, yeah, your eyes are not deceiving you. I actually really just said that. I'm just making you aware that I'm aware of what I've just done here. And here's the thing about where we find ourselves, is that people find it very difficult, and people are very quick to say it's about 140 characters, Twitter, and everyone just wanting to see just tidbits, no one wanting to actually seriously engage with people, is that people see red flags. So for instance, humor, people tell you there are things you can never joke about, which of course is a whole steaming pile of rubbish, right? You can joke about anything that you want to joke about. Now, seriously, throw anything at me. You can joke about violence. You can joke about death. You can joke about GBV. You can, but the point is, the only question is, what is the joke? Are you making fun of the situation, or are you making fun? Are you pointing out that there's a discomfort with this particular subject, and that there's a particular subtext to it? Because everything is contextual, right? And so people, as soon as you go in a particular direction, they just clamp up, like, you cannot possibly joke about disability. And I remember having a conversation with someone who actually is a paraplegic, and they were saying, and I think I've written about this, and they were saying, but why can't you joke about paraplegics? And I said, well, as someone who's not paraplegic, I just feel like it's uncomfortable. And he says, yeah, I get that. And then he illustrates it with a little joke of his own. He says, the other day, I was in the parking lot and he's from Durban, at Gateway, and I saw a guy who's a paraplegic park in a normal parking bay. And he says, and then I rolled up to him, and he actually makes it. He says, I rolled up to him and I said, what are you doing? Because we've all got to keep our side of the bargain. And there's your parking. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, I'm not sure whether to laugh, but here's the thing, is the joke is about disability. Is it funny? Well, I thought it was, because I find it funny. I'm laughing, right?
Yeah.
And so when you write humor now, I do not know about you, Gail. I do not know about you, Fiona, but so when you write nowadays, you cannot help but go back and read it and go, okay, who's going to read this and what are they going to make out of that? And so you can't help but get into a self-censorship space, especially because I'm writing for the lifestyle, Sunday Times, there's, advertisers. And so I cannot be, just go out there and write. And especially because I'm writing every week, which means that the opportunity for things to go through the cracks. Because one of the ways I could do it is just to write and say, well, I'm not going to edit myself and let them worry about it. But then there's always a possibility that things will go through the cracks. Yeah.
And you will be the one who has to face it, not your editor.
Because my name is going to be on it, yeah.
I've heard it said that with humor, you can punch up or you can punch sideways, but you can never punch down. You can never make fun of the more marginalized or the more vulnerable. Is that a rule? Can that be a rule, or can that rule also be broken?
No. It's a rule that can be broken. It's a very good rule. It's a sensible rule. It makes sense. You'd have to be pretty, stupid to not realize that making fun of the less fortunate, it does. But, again, like every other rule, there are exceptions to the rule. And the thing about humor is this, it's going to sound absurd, when I say it the way that I do. The only trick about humor is just make sure that you're funny. It's got to be funny. If it's not fun, people will forgive anything. If it's really funny, people will forgive it, right? So even when you talk about, I make fun, the power differential between me and my children is huge. I say a whole bunch of things about my children. I make fun of them. I make fun of people that I grew up with, where I grew up. People who did not go past, grade 5 in school, people who are living on the proverbial $1 a day, of the UN. I can still make fun of them. I can make fun of my grandmother who was a domestic worker back in the 1930s, 1940s and so on. I absolutely can. As a rule, yeah, it makes sense. And I think that the rule is actually meant to just, as a caution to you, just be mindful, of just, punching downwards. Because, it's almost a case of, so for instance, I've heard people say absurd things like white comedians cannot make fun of just the general black condition. Of course they can. Some of my favorite comedians are people like Bill Burr. Bill Burr just doesn't care. If he goes in and there's a 90% black audience, he's going to let rip. And so, yeah, I don't think that it's a fast rule. I don't think so.
Do you think your books would be any different if you'd brought them out now?
They absolutely would be. They absolutely, would be. Because, I would have obviously had very different, experiences. But also, if you read my books, and when you were just, saying the years now, I'm like, good Lord. That was 16 years ago. Cause it doesn't feel that way. But things would be different. In fact, a similarly interesting question would be, if I had an opportunity of taking this book now, and I was the editor/writer, how different would it be? And I think that it would be different. The essence of it would be the same, but it would be different. It'd probably be about 80% of it.
And when it comes to that process of collecting your existing writings into a book, do you do any rewriting of the existing material? Do you purpose write stuff for the book? Or do you just collect it together and submit it?
I'm a very great believer in writing that is as raw as possible. I hope it comes out in my writing, in the sense that I'd say 90% of things that I write, that people have read are first drafts. Because I like it messy. I do not, sometimes I read some things that I've written and they seem a bit sanitary, because there's just been too much tinkering with it. Now that word, let's move it. Let's maybe not write it that way. But in terms of the ideas, my ideas are in a constant state of flux. I am one of my friends, my radio friends, likes to say that I'm the most disloyal human being she knows. And sometimes it extends to loyalty to ideas. As soon as I believe that I have been presented with a superior logic, superior rationale, this is why I'd probably be horrible at politics, because people would call me a flip-flopper all the time. Because this new information changes my mind all the time. And so that's, even in the writing.
That's so interesting, because I've recently come to believe that the ability to change one's mind is one of the biggest signs of intelligence. That it's stupid people who hold on to an opinion in the face of all evidence to the contrary. And that actually the ability to change your mind is indicative of an ability to take on new information.
I think I could quote the line directly from some of my best friends are white, where I think I say I wrote something to the effect, and apologies to the author. I said the inability to allow the ingress of new information to change one's mind renders one an impregnable fortress of stupidity.
Love it.
So I do believe that. And it would be very interesting, if I changed my mind about that.
I'm changing my mind. You should not be allowed to change your mind.
Yeah, but I think, we obviously have limited time to actually, talk about the idea. But no, I totally agree with you. I think, a lot of the things, I wouldn't say a lot, but some things, would change. Some of them even fundamental. But yeah.
I want to talk to you about writer's block, which is a thing that I didn't used to believe in. I didn't think it was real. I think that if somebody needed to write, they would write. They would produce the words. And then in the second year of COVID, so it had been going on for a while, it was the year my mom passed away, and that year, 2021, I hardly wrote anything new. I was sort of refining existing stuff, and only in retrospect did I realize I had writer's block. I was dealing with something, and it was just a fallow period for me. But now you have this very long running column where you have to meet that deadline.
Yeah.
Do you not believe in writer's block? Have you ever experienced it?
Anyone who has ever written a weekly column for longer than sort of 5 years, and they do not believe that there is such a thing as writer's block. Whew, yeah. I'd love to meet them here. Look, it depends what your definition of writer's block is, right? I remember, one of my favorite editors for Lifestyle was someone, and I think it has to do with, I suppose, more or less the same age. We think pretty much the same way. Carlos Amato.
Yes.
And the one time I said to him, and I think he'd been editor for about 3 years at the time, I said, Carlos, I don't understand this. Like, I've been writing this thing and you've been editing it, because at least, we could meet and have a beer now and then. So I said, and watch Arsenal lose yet again. And I said, Carlos, you just never give me feedback about, how am I doing? And he looks at me and he says, Ndumiso, if you write a weekly column and you write one good column a month, and you write like 1, maybe so-so, and 2 a bit pretty substandard. He says, you're doing well, right? And he says, the reason that you don't get that feedback is because you get it right at least 3 times out of 4. Which means that when you don't get it right, I don't care about it, and so on. I said, but pattern-wise, like, have there been periods? And I says, yeah, no, there have been times where I could tell that if I had been rating your columns and I've been saying the average is there about 7.58 and so on, there would be a dip somewhere. It's like 6.5. But then you kind of self-correct. And so why would you worry about that sort of thing? And so to answer your question is, I would imagine that what he was perceiving as sort of 6.5 would have been a period where I wasn't writing optimally for whatever reason, because I've got things happening. I've got school fees. I've got this to do, to pay and whatnot. But it's not something that I think of. I've never been consciously going through writer's block. Mm-hmm. I've never sat down and wanted to write. And I felt like, that happens is just part of what happens, from month to month, where, week 1, I'm absolutely at my best. But week 3, on that day, I'm just like, I've got deadline. What is this nonsense? What am I supposed to be writing here and whatever? But never anything where I thought to myself, good Lord, I've got, writer's block. So, no, I haven't. Not as in consciously thinking, but obviously it must have, at an empirical level.
I want to talk about this very exciting move towards fiction. And I have lots of questions about this. And the first one, is this something that you've always wanted to do? Has there been a bug at the back of your head going, let's write some fiction, let me make something up?
Okay. What's interesting is that all my writing before I got published was fiction. Ah. So, if I go back to things that I was writing, when I was a teenager, when I was in my 20s, when I was teaching, when I was at Unilever, I was always just obsessed with this one question. And that question is, I'd look at anything happening and I'd go, well, that's interesting. But what if? But what
exactly.
If? But what if? And I'd be far more interested in the what if than the actual story itself. And so I've been in love with fiction, purely because, I would imagine, if I've read 10,000 books, I would imagine that 9,000 out of them would have been fiction. Because that's pretty much all I like. I really enjoy reading. So no, for me, it doesn't feel like I am doing any kind of step change. It is just that the process itself, when now you understand how you write a novel and how you develop characters and all your mini arcs and your major one and sometimes, and so that's where the challenges are with writing a book. But coming up with stories, that's the easy bit.
And are you enjoying it? What is the writing feeling like for you?
Sometimes I am driven to the depths of despair and I want to slit my wrists. And sometimes, it's a sense of absolute elation when you feel like, oh my God, I'm so good. This is a brilliant story. I think it's what you think. But but it does feel like a bit of your own physical flesh is also being torn. It's leaving it's leaving you because it's this thing, it's this story, because it's my first foray into fiction, and therefore there's a fair amount of biographical material that's in there, because it's just a story that, again, it started from a real story, and I started asking the 1,000 what ifs. Yeah.
And my last question for now, Fiona, I will let you speak again. Don't panic. Can we expect your trademark humour in your fiction? Can you tell I'm very excited about this? I really want you to go home, finish it, and have it published by next month, please.
I have no. I'll tell you this much. Like I always try and tell myself, and I don't always succeed, even when I write a column, that's got humour as a descriptor. Is don't try to be funny. That's where the funny, comes from. So I'm trying to say to myself, don't try to go out of your way to be funny. Just write the story, tell the story how you tell it. And if people pick up on the humor, well then great. But that for me is not the prize. But I imagine, actually, I've already thought of 3-4 things in the book that are actually pretty hilarious. Yeah.
You mentioned the biographical details that are going to come out in the fiction. In your column, you mine your personal life, your family life, your friends, your colleagues for inspiration and for humor. Have you had pushback from your wife, your kids, your family, anybody who has said, stop writing about me, that's enough now? Like a child who's saying, stop putting my face on Facebook, I'm saying no to it now. And at least that's not something one has to worry about in fiction. Has that happened?
The thing about that is what I said earlier about, I try very hard not to satirize anyone that I do not like. And therefore, when I write about people, even when, particularly my mother, oh my goodness, my mother, and she reads me religiously.
Yeah.
And so, if I do not have any empathy with you, if I don't like you a little bit, if I don't get you in any way, I don't write, because I try very hard. Humor is in its very nature, like I said, we're laughing at things that mostly are mean. And there's no need to now then be mean while you're being mean. While we're in the mean space, and so, people just are very self-aware sometimes. Even when I'm not actually intending to write about them, people go, hey, and then there's Ndumiso here. Just don't write about this,
Yeah.
And so on. But any pushback, where I've had someone seriously come to me and said, I did not appreciate you writing about me. No, I have actually never had that. I mean, and that includes like a column that I wrote where I said, some people and some events are just in excess of what I need to know. Will someone explain to me why I even know who Kanyimbao is? And I went on and one of the people, that I wrote about, I am at the Three Talk Studios being interviewed by Nolin Maulona-sang a couple of years ago. And he happens to be the next guest. And now Nolin comes and says, oh, have you guys met each other? And horror of horrors, like the previous Sunday, I'd actually said he's just in excess of things I need to. Why do I even know he exists? And he looks at me. He says, "Oh yeah, no, Ndumiso Ngcobo, I do exist. Our current MMC is MMC of the Sushi King.
Yeah,
Can you go in there?" And yeah, because I thought that could possibly, that could have. But he also just thought,
took it in quite a good spirit.
He took it on the chin. He took it, yeah.
And maybe there is something quite flattering about being the subject of somebody else's thoughts. Because I think we're all scared nobody's thinking about us at all. So maybe it's nice to know someone's thinking about you.
Yeah. No, I do not, because I mean, also in my radio career, I've had to interview former President Jacob Zuma, who, I've ripped him apart a couple of times, but he also just, took it in his stride, because I remember he sat down and he looked at my head and he said, for someone who has had so many things to say about my head and the 2 seats of power, you've got a strange shaped head yourself. I mean, it was awkward only for like 2-3 seconds, but then we moved on, we moved on with our lives, Yeah.
And even the children, I'm fascinated about that. My children recently came across a blog I wrote. My daughter was confusingly researching me during school and came across my blog, and came home and said, I'd written something about lying to them about the tooth fairy.
Yeah.
And she presented me with the evidence and went, what's this?
Yeah.
So have you had no pushback?
No, none whatsoever. My kids, I don't think they remember a time that I wasn't, ribbing them about one thing or the other, because I do it to their faces all the time. Mm-hmm. So there are very few things I write about them that I haven't said to them to their face. But we have that kind of relationship.
How old are they?
Eldest is 28.
Okay.
And then there's 18, and then there's 17, and then there's 15.
Okay. If it hasn't happened by now, then it's not going to happen. Interesting.
Yeah, no.
When you write, I'm particularly thinking of your column, do you have an audience in mind? Do you think, okay, these are the demographics of the Sunday Times readership. I have to appeal to everybody. There has to be something for everyone. Or do you just write and let it find its audience?
Oh, but isn't this the beautiful gift that social media has given us, though, is that we have a very good sense of who we're talking to generally. Mm-hmm. And you kind of realize that when you write for the Sunday Times, you're speaking to more or less the same audience that you have when you're just writing about your daily things on Facebook. The answer is obviously yes. But if the next question is, but do you do it consciously? Then no. Mm-hmm. I think that I am so comfortable in that space that I don't, so it's not a conscious competence on my part to know who I'm talking to. I think that there is the competence is there to know who I'm talking to, but it's pretty subconscious. So I don't sit there and I go, ooh, with this, with this appeal to, because some things that I write, I realize that a Fiona who resides in a particular world would never get it. And at the same time, I know that someone who lives in Tembisa or who lives in Soweto would absolutely get it. But what would surprise a lot of people is just how many commonalities you have with people, particularly people in the same demographic as you are, at least economically.
And has your readership changed as the way newspapers are delivered to us has changed? Because I have to tell you, when we got the hard copy Sunday Times thrown over the gate once a week, I read you religiously.
Yeah.
Now that it's more of an online experience, I don't.
Yeah.
So has your readership changed due to those changes?
I do not worry about readerships and the stats around the Sunday Times readership. I consider that a newspaper issue than mine. I do not let that affect, it has not affected me in any way. So, the short answer is, I do not know.
Okay.
I do not worry about, I don't look at my figures, for instance. I don't religiously want to find out who's reading me, how many people are reading me, has it dipped? I just write.
And it hasn't changed the face of your audience in your head? Clearly not. You're still writing to the same people.
I'm still writing for pretty much who I was writing for. I'm just writing for that particular demographic that would get what I'm writing about.
Okay. Well, I think we are now ready for our wrap-up question, which is to ask you what you are reading or listening to or watching at the moment that's made an impression on you.
A book that I think is topical that I'm currently reading. It's in the car as we speak, actually, is Winnie and Mandela.
Yes.
Johnny
Steinberg book,
because it's a story that fascinates me. I'm reading it and I'm thinking, He was,
Is this book giving you new insights or it's confirming what you thought?
It's confirming a lot of things that I suspected, including Mandela's love life, before he got married. Including during when he was married, and so forth. Yeah, so it's a fascinating book. But I also am far more interested in the book, just from a historical perspective. I always find that reading these books, you get a whole lot more than just the story of the main protagonist. So I'm reading that. I'm also revisiting an old book because of the new series, the TV series. Shaka Ilembe, which I haven't watched,
right?
Which is about Shaka Hasenzangakhona, the so-called founder of the Zulu kingdom.
I saw on social media you said that you're going to wait for the hype to die down and then you'll watch it,
and then I'll watch it because I don't get my history from TV series. I'd much rather read about it. So I'm also reading a book that it's kind of a Bible of mine, but I'm now sitting down, I'm reading it. It's a book written in the late 1800s, olden times in Zululand and Natal by a Catholic priest, Alfred Bryant. And it talks about, in part, that history, the history that is covered in the book Ilembe, because the sudden interest in that story has just popped into my head.
Fantastic. Well, I look forward to you actually watching the series and giving us your thoughts on it, because I think they'll be very insightful.
And I look forward to this fiction book coming out. I'm going to now be watching every announcement of every new book list. Yeah, I'm really excited about that.
Yeah. So now you're going to be, you're talking about who you write for. I'm not going to be writing for you. But when, but when the book comes out, I'll be very interested in what you think of it.
Very excited.
Thank you so much for your time, Ndumiso.
Thank you.
We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Gail, there are people who are funny on the page and people who are funny in person, and they don't always overlap. But I have to say, Ndumiso was one of those people who he's just hilarious whichever way you take him.
100% fantasy dinner party. He is on the list. He is just wonderful in person.
I think that's what we're doing here. We're having our fantasy dinner party and inviting all our dream guests to come and talk to us.
It's so funny you say that, because in the middle of that interview with Ndumiso, I suddenly was struck by the enormous privilege of what we are doing here, that we get to talk to these amazing, fascinating people, and they come and speak to us, and we get to choose who we want to speak to. And it's an extraordinary experience we're having, Fiona.
And we can ask them anything we like, and they have to answer us. It's so incredible.
It's much better than a dinner party where you have to have an exchange of conversation. We can just drill them.
So, Gail, what did you get from Ndumiso today?
I got so much that I can't talk about it all, but I was very struck by what he said about humor is mean. And it struck a chord with me, because I think it's so true that there is a streak of nastiness when we notice something funny. And the reason it resonated so much is because the people I'm drawn to are people who make me laugh. And I've often said, I like people with a little bit of nastiness in them. I don't like 100% nice people. I don't like someone who's always only saying the best of everyone and never making a snarky comment about anything. I like my people to have a little drop of nasty in them. And I almost feel better about it now, because Ndumiso put it in context. The nasty is what's making them funny, and the funny is what I like.
I hear that. I really do. And what I further to that got out of it was, don't try to be funny, when he said that. And one of the funniest things he said was the idea that you can take a class in being funny, that you can go and learn how to move your face in a funny way if you're going to be a stand-up comedian, or how to construct humor. Now, just the idea of that is funny. It's because it's ridiculous and it's unexpected to take a class in being funny. I can't imagine that there's much you would get out of that would be useful in any way. And the idea of being deliberate and self-consciousness and being a try-hard when it comes to being funny is funny in itself and is already unsuccessful. One can't imagine that trying hard can result in anything that's actually funny.
Absolutely. I think when you read, you can often tell when the writer is trying hard to be funny, and nothing kills the humor as quickly as that. I do know that on the page, I'm only funny when it comes naturally.
Okay.
I cannot set up. Kate is wonderful in our joint writing. She can set up a joke and she can do it for pages. I can't be deliberately funny. It has to be observational humor for me to be funny. So yeah, it's challenging. But humor in writing is challenging, but Ndumiso's given us the masterclass now.
He really has.
Fiona, what do you have to teach us this week?
Well, I think it relates to what you've just said and to what Ndumiso was saying about sitting at airports. And it's the power of observation, the power of the writer's eye that is seeing things that other people will miss. And that is a skill that can be honed. Some people do it naturally, as he said, but you can sit down and watch people and allow your brain to speculate about a situation and to be stimulated by what it's seeing. What is the person wearing? How are they conducting themselves? How are they greeting that person that they're meeting at the airport? What's going on there? Is there tension? Are they relaxed? Is it a couple who've sort of thoroughly sick of each other and have been fighting about what time to get to the airport, and now they're completely pissed off with each other? Just look at what the situation is with that writer's eye, and you will find something to mine there in your fiction.
With a little warning that it can be dangerous, because one of the things I do, I don't know if I've spoken about this before, I make up stories about people. And then I lose track of whether I've made the story up or it's a true story about them. And then I can't say anything to anyone because I don't know if what I'm thinking is true or something I made up completely.
And in terms of your writing advice for the week?
So I've been listening to a writing podcast where Ellie Griffiths has been speaking. And the first interesting thing, those who know Ellie Griffiths' writing, she writes a wonderful archaeologically based murder series about a character called Ruth Galloway. Her name is not Ellie Griffiths. That is her writing name.
Oh my goodness.
Her real name is much more of a writing name. Her real name is something like Domenica De Rosa.
Wow.
And she wrote books under that name, but then when she went into writing crime, she needed a new name. And I love the way her pseudonym is so much more boring than her real name. But that's not what I want to say. What I want to say is she spoke about how when she started writing the crime series, she plotted it out carefully. And now that she's got 15 books under her belt, she's a lot more comfortable pantsing.
Yes.
She'll set up a scenario and then she'll just let's see how it plays out, just write it, see what happens. And I think there's a lesson in that for first-time writers, I think pantsing is a very dangerous business to try and get into up front. I think for that first book, plot it at least to some degree, know where you're going to some degree, unless you're really, really confident that you've got the sort of brain that can pants. And maybe as you become more experienced, the pantsing will become more natural.
I 100% agree with that. And when I think back on my own writing journey, that's exactly what I've been doing. I needed the structure of plotting initially, and now I have the sort of comfort level and the experience, I think, to venture off into the unknown and know that something fairly coherent will come out of it.
And it's a good place to be, but be realistic about when you're going to get there.
I quite agree. So if you are a plotter or a pantser, if you have thoughts on this issue, if you would like to learn how to be a humorist, if you have some insights to share on how to be funny, if you, as you probably have read the work of Ndumiso, please get in touch. We're on email, we're on all social media, and we'd love to hear from you.
You've been listening to another production from Solid Gold Podcasts.